You're on.
Perfect.
All right. So you messaged me earlier this week. I think following my following my little crash out. I don't know if that's what caused you to message me.
No, not this time.
No. Okay.
It was just a coincidence, I think.
Okay. So you've been wanting to talk about, I guess, your experience in Advanced Constructed and in Genesys as well, which I thought was interesting because I talked about this on stream already, even though I didn't react to your video because I had already seen it, so I didn't want to react to something I had already seen. But I watched your initial video about Genesis format, in which I felt like you were one of the few people who had some negative things to say about it. I guess uh, in your initial response. So do you want to maybe summarize a little bit of what your initial sentiment there was?
Yeah, I think that it was. I don't know if it was worded poorly. I think I said everything I wanted to say.
Mm-hmm.
But it's more from the perspective of Time Wizard players, where it's like they're not going to like this. And I
Yeah.
think that I was accurate in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to say throughout the video, it's like if you like someone who enjoys current, then you'll probably like Genesis as well. I think more than anything, I was just kind of playing devil's advocate of like trying to say the other side from the Time Wizard perspective.
Yeah.
But the format itself, once you move away from the kind of its relation to Time Wizard, I think it has a lot of good things going for it,
Mm-hmm.
especially the handling of it.
Yeah. I do think I after watching your video, I did agree with it because I really felt like it was advertised as something that, like, this is something that if you have played Yu-Gi-Oh back in the day, you're really gonna like this, and this is going to be bringing back all of the older players. Well, I do still think there is some truth to this. I do think it is a lower power level format, and like not everyone who is a Time Wizard player quit in 2010 as Edison times. There's people who quit in 2018 maybe because of the power creep of Firewall Dragon or whatever. And I think like maybe Genesis format is more like something that they would have kept playing if this is how the game was. And so they're still going to find themselves liking it more than um, Advanced Constructed, or what Advanced Constructed has turned into. But I do agree that it is still going to be more complex than most Time Wizard formats, just because the card pool is bigger and the power level is higher, even though it's not as high as Advanced Constructed. But the whole I think that's not the main selling point anymore. Like I've kind of changed my mind on that a little bit, because initially I also felt like um that was the main selling point, is like lower power level and bring back the older players. But following my initial crash out earlier this week, to me personally, one of the main takeaways, and I wanted to ask you about this because you actually played in the Invitational and stuff like that. To me, it seems like it could just become an actual alternative to Advanced Constructed for people who are currently playing Advanced Constructed, because it just seems healthier.
Yeah. I think one thing that is I kind of missed the mark on in terms of like how I worded things is that when you look at Time Wizard player, they're a very vocal minority of players. And
Mm-hmm.
they're a fairly large minority of players, but they're very there's a whole community server for them. They play a lot of their own formats. They organize their own tournaments,
Mm-hmm.
and so they're very live and active about the format they love the most. And the one thing I found, which is people coming and talking to me, or responses to my video, is even though there's not a lot of support for the retro formats from like 2018, like toss format, to like 2022, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people that really love that kind of power level of the game,
Mm-hmm.
which surprised me because you don't see those types of tourneys going on. Like no one's playing an Emancipator format or like toss form. Even though toss form I think is talked about very fondly, I don't think there's a lot of kind of older communities built around that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of people that actually like that format a lot.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of their target audience. And I think there is actually a much larger amount of players that really like that power level than initially thought.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the other thing that's nice is that with the lower power level, this is a way that you're going to bring potentially some older players in. Like it is completely different than Time Wizard, of course, much closer to current.
Yeah.
But even just having that step down, there may be people who play older formats or perhaps don't play Yu-Gi at all and they want to get into it, but they're like it's so complicated. And so just taking a step back and going to the Genesis power level, I think that may be something that they're more willing to give a chance to. Especially when you get to gameplay patterns, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier and a lot less cutthroat, I think, than current, where like you need to know how to hand trap every deck perfectly to even have a game.
Hmm.
Where in that format, it's like, oh, I can just play my all spell deck and start activating spells, draw a bunch, and then oh, he's a dark ruler, then like have a game in a much more not to say simplified way, but without knowing the true intricacies of your opponent's deck, you can get a lot. You have a lot less non games like that.
Right. Yeah. One point you also made in your video is that links aren't actually that complicated. I think like you said, like one of the main things that is driving people away from Yu-Gi-Oh is like the complexity that's not actually coming from link monsters or pendulum monsters because they're not that hard to grasp, but like the rulings and like having to know your opponent's deck inside out and all those kind of things. Which that was something that I also initially agreed with when you said it, but then thinking about it more, I do think links add an entire layer of complexity to the game. Not because it's hard to understand the mechanic itself, but because link monsters make it so that in a lot of game states, like game states become a lot harder to evaluate because you always have to be aware of like what your opponent could link into at any moment, right? Where like a synchro summon or an exceed summon or to an extent even a fusion summon is a lot more telegraphed because like, okay, there's a tuner on the board, there's a fusion spell being activated, or there's two monsters with the same level on the board. With links, it's more like anything can be on the board, as much as like a random normal summon alone. And it's like, does that threaten a link summon right now? Does that make like, and in some decks it does, in some decks it doesn't. In some decks, the link one doesn't actually do anything, and the main purpose of the link summon is just to put the monster into the graveyard. In other decks, the link one actually does have an effect that searches something, and so on, right? And so I do think it adds a layer of complexity to evaluating any game state.
I think, I mean, obviously it makes it more complicated when you have more summon mechanics and larger card pool.
Yeah.
The big thing is, especially after playing the Genesis Invitational, and I've played some other DB games with the format, that it was hard to realize until I played a bit more was how much links actually power creep the game.
Yeah.
Like it is
Yeah.
very, very like you kind of know, but it is just very, very surprising how much simple cards like IP,
Yeah.
um, or Nightmare Phoenix, like stuff like that, power creeps the game. Because one big thing is if you're playing in Genesis, anytime you make an extra monster with any other summoning mechanic, the cost of making that monster is generally true. And what I mean by that is if I'm making Gallant Granite and I overlay two monsters,
Yeah.
those two monsters are now gone and I
Yeah.
lose the zone. There's
Yeah.
no good way of utilizing it. Where in current, it's like, okay, I make Gallant Granite. I've used two monsters, but I essentially only have used one because I
Yeah.
still have the Granite to do something
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah.
And in one hand, it's kind of good that you have this toolbox of cards like the Nightmares or even SP that let you
Mhm.
like go second, have like a utility of things, Goddess, like having a way to beat towers. I think that's a good thing,
Yeah.
but it also like power creeps the game massively. I think we've done a
Yeah.
good job of getting rid of a lot of the problematic links. But not having IP just slapped on every end board is like you're losing two interruptions immediately for any deck that
Mhm.
like is one of these mid-range decks that gets body for free. And I think that then kind of walks into the complexity conversation where if the end boards aren't as good, you now don't need to like know how to hand trap perfectly. You can go and have a different strategy
Mhm.
when trying to go second. And I think
Yeah.
that's more interesting. And I think a lot of the decks are now like much more like they're built how they're themed. And so if you look at the Rain Typhoon decks that topped the Genesis Invitational, it was
Yeah.
them not playing many hand traps. It's just I'm gonna play a spell deck. My tech cards are gonna be Pot of Greed, or the other one I think there was another one that topped 16 and one that topped 8. The one that played top 8 was just playing runic cards and Pot of Greed.
Yeah.
And so the whole strategy was just I'm going to activate spell cards. I think that's a lot easier to kind of go and play as
Mhm.
someone who doesn't know the intricacies of every deck. Where I'm just going to draw cards. I'm going to draw my cards that clear the board. I'm going to clear the board. And I'm going to continue with my strategy from there on. That's a lot easier than having to worry about how to hand trap everything. It's
Yeah.
also a lot more fun because now when you're playing a spell deck, you're like, okay, I'm actually playing a spell deck. I'm not playing a spell deck with all these hand traps that or specific breakers that need to
Mhm.
be in just to be able to function. Same with trap decks. Like I think there's more trap decks in this format where I can choose to just play, 30 traps. I'll have lava golems or something else in there to help
Yeah.
the top of the board, but they're being a lot more true to their deck. If they want to play a trap deck, they're going to break boards by setting trap cards. And so I think that's both simpler because you don't need to know the intricacies of every deck, but it's also just more enjoyable because decks feel like the decks that you're trying to play. Like the
Yeah.
tech cards feel like they're meant for the deck as opposed to
Mhm.
you're playing a deck and then you need to play all your tech cards for the meta.
Yeah, it
And I think
certainly. I
that's a
feel like
very
it.
good thing.
Yeah, it forces people to play decks how they're meant to be played. Essentially, if you can't just take any bodies and turn them into the most generically good link monsters, which I 100% agree that the extra deck being a toolbox is something that I'm a fan of. But you can't deny the fact that like having a toolbox at your disposal at all times that any monster can turn into is a crazy amount of power at your hands, right? Like being able to out any spell card at any point with Nightmare Phoenix, or being able to banish anything with any two monsters with SP Little Knight and have a disruption afterwards, and so on and so forth, definitely makes it so the requirement for a deck to be functional is a lot lower, because all it needs to be doing is like vomit bodies onto the board. Which, if your deck does that in Genesys, it's not necessarily good, because you do need something to turn those bodies into, and they need to fulfill more specific requirements, because links are obviously the most generic extra deck summon, and so those being gone, I think, does a lot of good things for the power level of the format.
Yeah.
How do you like from someone who's been playing Advanced Constructed for how long? I actually don't know the answer.
I've been playing since 2011, so a very
Mm,
long time. I
yeah.
didn't really have. There's like layers where I just played like locals for the first 5 years.
Hmm.
Then it was like a regional level for 5 years. I didn't start topping much until 2021,
Hmm.
2022. So
Yeah.
there's kind of different layers of that, but I've been playing for quite a long time.
Yeah. So the both of us have been playing for a very long time. How do you feel like initially? Of course, we don't know yet exactly how successful Genesys is, but how did it feel to you, the difference between how this is handled and how the TCG is being handled, in terms of like the communication, the frequent updates, and so on and so forth? Because that's really one of the things that sets it apart from Advanced Constructed from me for the most. Like the most. Like, I don't know if you've seen the most recent article they've posted just
Yeah.
yesterday. That sort of thing is something that it. I feel like it shouldn't be blowing my mind, but as someone who's been playing Yu-Gi-Oh for over 20 years, it does blow my mind. But yeah.
I think most people would just agree that the communication is very good. Like that's what we
Yeah.
all wanted for so long.
Yeah.
And I guess the obvious question is why don't we just have that in current and have a lot of things
Yeah,
like any
exactly.
floodgate sentiments in current? And the
Yeah.
answer I have an answer for that, and I think this is something that a lot of people know or think of, but no one's like straight out said it. And so I was talking with one of the economy reps at YC Anaheim, and this is something like they said I could share, which is that the ban list for the TCG is influenced by the Konami Japan to some degree.
Hmm.
And so their ability to share information is a lot lower just because they have more chefs in the kitchen. Like there's more people that are
Yeah.
going to come in with different ideas.
Yeah.
And so they actively can't go and say what their plans are because they may not know it initially.
Okay.
And so it's not an issue of like, well, they're trying for Genesis and they're not for TCG. It's the fact that for Genesis, it's only Konami, NA, and EU. I'm not sure how much they're involved, but it's only the Western Konamis.
Hmm.
And so they have a lot more ability to, have this communication, have
Yeah.
constant updates, and not have to worry about, getting approval or something from something else. And so it's, on one hand, that's somewhat frustrating because it's kind of like, well,
Yep.
if this goes really well, we should, and everyone's loving it, we should just do that in TCG.
Yep.
But for now, it's like that's a very good thing
Yep.
overall that we just have this. And I think it's what's going to lead to success. Is I don't think that like one of my initial things was that the Genesis format isn't necessarily always going to be better than current.
Hmm.
And like if you look before the last ban list where we had VS Alive still, BS Yummy and Driggleto, I think that format is very very good. It's gone a bit worse now in TCG.
Yeah.
But I would say that format was better than Genesis is currently. And now
Hmm.
if we fast forward a month, it's like maybe now Genesis is better. And so I don't
Right.
think it's necessarily like a higher power level leads to a worse game. It's just
Hmm.
about interactions and how much you can interact with your opponent trying to get to their win
Yeah.
con.
Yep.
But freaking updates will allow that
Yeah.
balance to be treading kept a lot better.
Yeah.
And so I think if you're just looking at the fact that they have more control over things,
Hmm.
it's just strictly a good thing. And I think that's something that's going to lead to popularity and results for the format doing well in the long run.
Hmm. Yeah. You kind of touched on something that I personally, if you ask me what I want from this format or where I see myself in this format as well, is like I want this format to become like an actual alternative to Advanced Constructed. I don't want to play one or the other. In an ideal world, I think both of these are well supported, and you can just at any time as a Yu-Gi-Oh player, it's a win-win because you can just basically pick the one that's better at the moment. Of course, it comes with some caveats because like you can technically like what's going to happen to YCSs in the future. Like is there going to be like half of them are going to be Advanced Constructed, the other half are going to be Genesys, or like how is this going to work? Because like if one format is significantly better than the other, but the next YCS is in the worst of the two formats, then what's really the what do you do? Do you go to the YCS? Do you play the main event in the worst format, or do you play the public events in Genesis format or whatever? Like where do you see yourself as someone who's very actively playing Advanced Constructive? Would you ever skip a YCS to play the Genesis Invitational if the format is so much better, or is that a no go because we need to be competitive? We need to enter the main event. Like what's the sentiment?
I guess it kind of depends on how bad the format is.
Okay.
Overall, I mean it's a personal basis as well, like what the metas are in each format.
Mm-hmm.
The nice thing is you always have the ability, at least in the current setup, to like play a few rounds of the main event, and then if you're not feeling it, then go to Genesis, which is what happened at Anaheim for me. Like I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
really, I played Draco Tail, but there's just a lot of hate for it. I lost round one just to, I think I got unlucky to some degree, but I was also misplay. At that point, it's kind of like I didn't feel like playing and trying to dodge deep barrier for that many rounds.
Yeah.
And so then it was an easy switch over. Once it starts getting bigger, you have to just have a decision made whether you want like the Genesis to grow as well, and then it feasts on the YCSs, or whether you keep them separate. I think that's just will come down to players. And the other thing is like as Genesis grows, if it keeps getting bigger, then it'll have more prestige behind it as well.
Yeah.
And so maybe you just end up having like people still get the competitive factor from the Genesises.
Yeah, I mean, if
Just
eventually, if you have to go through a bunch of qualifiers on Saturday and then the tournament on Sunday is like a couple hundreds players big, then people are going to look at it as a like real success. If you win that thing, like it's going to be. I mean, not that the current one was not like a real success, but like it was like like 40, 50 people that qualified for the day two thing. So it doesn't. I'm sure it doesn't feel the same as winning a YCS, but eventually, if that thing becomes really big, then who knows? Maybe it could.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like kind of like the top 8 of a regional. I think it's a fair comparison
Mm-hmm.
at this point. But that's question will change, and people's opinions on which format they should go into will change as the
Yeah.
entire format of Genesis changes and whether
Yeah.
it gets bigger or not.
Mm-hmm. I personally, I could see a future where both of these formats become, or like Genesis becomes a big format, and then eventually, I don't see a reason why a YCS shouldn't be like just a convention for all sorts of Yu-Gi-Oh players in different formats. Like I'm kind of looking at it through the lens of what's happening, for example, in Pokemon, where a big Pokemon tournament is always both. They have a big TCG tournament and they have a big VGC tournament, and it's not like, well, one is not more important than the other. It's just like both are part of the Pokemon community. Both are well supported. Both have their own stream. Both basically are the main event. It's not like one is a main event, the other one is the public event or whatever. They're both treated as, they basically treated equally, and everyone plays whatever they prefer. And I think ideally this is what this turns into. If that the fact like both formats having a big enough player base to support basically their own tournament.
I think one caveat with that is that I don't think there's as much overlap between the TCG players and the VCG players for Pokemon.
Right.
Where in Genesis, I think it'll be a lot larger.
Right.
I
Yeah.
think the other comparison to make is to Magic, which has multiple formats, and to my
Mm-hmm.
knowledge, how it works is they just cycle through which event is which.
Right.
So they'll have an event for current, and then they'll have I guess for them would be standard, and an event for
Yeah.
Pioneer like 3 months later, and so they just
Mm-hmm.
cycle it. So I mean,
Yeah.
there's a bunch of different ways to do it. It depends as well how much you want to just keep Genesis a little bit more casual.
Right.
Because I don't think there's necessarily a problem with that. Like I think you should have some kind of edge, and maybe the Genesis Invitational will start getting bigger. You start having the Time Wizard number, so it's like 300 people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that can still bring people around.
Yeah.
And then you have like 1 or 2 Genesis YCSs a year, so you still get their fill of things.
Mm-hmm.
But still have the standard format as kind of the main show. I
Yeah.
think the big thing that I would like to come from it is for it to be successful with the grow, and then for Konami, NA, or EU to be able to take the results and go like, hey, look at this, like look at how much the players love this and love talk the feedback and us
Yeah.
having control over things, and maybe that will lead to them having more freedom in the TCG standard in the
Right.
future. I think that's kind of like the best thing that could happen, because then all the communication aspects which we love about Genesis would then be there for current as well.
Right.
And so that would be very nice.
I mean, yeah, that is the optimal outcome. Is like they basically say like, here, look, they love this, so let's do the same thing in advanced. Yeah. Um. Yeah, I mean, I think it's exciting. I think it's an exciting time because Yu-Gi-Oh has never had like a real alternative way to play it. I mean, of course, we've had public events in like Time Wizard formats or whatever, but it feels this feels different to me. At least it feels like it's being handled differently than Rivalry of the Warlords or Time Wizard or any of that nature. It feels like a real alternative way to play the game that could have so many positive impacts. Some of which I've already talked about today, like I mentioned earlier, like this is going to make products more attractive because you now have a second way to look at certain cards. You know, you don't look at the Art Mage cards and go like, yeah, these are not good enough in advanced constructed. They're basically useless. You now have a way to look at them through the lens of Genesis format and be like, yeah, this is actually a capable deck in this other format. And if enough people play it, that could drive demand for product without just they're just one good card in. I get what's there's one chase card in Doom of Dimension. It's like basically Marshmallow, right? Like, but
Yeah.
Genesis format is creating demand. I feel like for cards like Radiant Typhoon, and I think that's awesome because that's going to make the set better as a whole. And so it has a lot of positives in it for Yu-Gi-Oh as a whole. But why don't we go ahead and talk about the format a little bit, because they did say in this article, they said 4 to 5 weeks after the last update is when we're going to get the next one, which is in, I believe, 2 weeks at this point. Like, I think the first update was about 2.5 weeks ago. I think it was a Wednesday, because I remember recording a video about it right before I left for YCS Lille, which should have been on the Wednesday night. So 2.5 weeks ago, we got the first point update, which was like a couple days after they announced the format. And in 2 weeks, we're going to get the next. So how do you feel about the format, the balancing, and which type of individual cards and decks you want to see hit?
I think it's still early on, so it's a bit rough at the moment, but I think that's just the fact that it's new. VS is obviously overtuned. I think
Yeah.
Holy Sue resolving in Genesis is basically game over.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a few people I did that too, which was like, my bad. the next game.
Yeah.
So I think that's a bit outlier. And I think there's still some degenerate strategies like the Exodia piles or the generator VFD turbo deck
Mm-hmm.
that are a bit of outliers.
Yeah.
But I think that the kind of meta under that seems really good. Like there's a lot of diversity in what you have. Like you have the Radiant Typhoon deck if you want to play spells,
Yeah.
a strategy like that. You have Odeon being like the premier trap deck, and then you have a bunch of combo decks that, while they are still comboing and like ending with 6+ interruptions,
Yeah.
it feels a lot more manageable because they're less layered and they have significantly less follow up.
Yeah.
Like I think the big thing is links often just give insane follow up
Mm-hmm.
because they'll just give free advantage anytime you summon one of the good links. And so there are a lot more things where it's like they make their full board, and I have a sphere mode, and I'm playing like trap deck, so I can sphere mode them and then set
Yeah.
3, and then like get into this grind game like that, or like the
Mm-hmm.
Typhoon deck where I'm just gonna draw cards. Oh, here's a Dark Ruler, and then play from there.
Yeah.
So the combo decks don't feel as oppressive. Like the thing with current is it feels like every deck's kind of doing everything right now. Like even the mid-range decks are ending with like a super large amount of interruptions.
Mm-hmm.
And every deck has insane amounts of follow-up, where in Genesis the decks are a lot more in their niche, where like if you're playing this combo deck, you generally don't have this insane follow-up every game.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the format beneath that is a lot better once they tweak some points.
Yeah.
The other big thing is I ended up losing to Henko, who's playing the Generator VFD deck in top 8.
Yeah.
Which is obviously not that fun of a deck. But the interesting thing is I think they've done a good job with, like, if they actually handle it correctly and hit that deck, with allowing creativity to exist but not ruin the game. And so I knew he was on it most of the day. I got paired against him top 8, and I lose that roll game 1. He VFDs me, I lose.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting there playing signing for game 2, and I know Henko. He's lives in the Toronto area, so I play against him a bunch. And I know he's not just going to play this deck where all 100 points are VFD, I'm going to win the die roll and win the game. Like I know he actually has strategies going second, which all cost 0 points because you can't have any other strategy going second, like with cards that cost points. And there's 2 layers to this. So one is that his deck was very different than other decks because rather than him having some form of powerful staples, he's playing a lot of super budget cards.
Yeah.
And it ended up having like Kaiju's the main that was searchable by Overraptor, but Overraptor's also Engine.
Mm-hmm.
It had like some random. There's a Photon card on the side deck that's like a Danko Sekka that costs 0 points. And what I've realized is like when I'm playing against him going first, now it's like, well, he has these tech cards to try and break my board. It's worse, but like he's done a good job of actually being creative and making the deck as good as possible going second.
Yeah.
And so you can have creativity in creating this degenerate strategy and like advancing the deck list and making it good, which I think is what we all want. But the thing is now ideally we're not in a position where this is going to go and warp the format forever. Because
Right.
if what they do is they go to the next list and go, okay, we're gonna make a bunch of these like level 9 cards 1 point, you can still play pure generators. Like the deck doesn't, you may has 5 less points, 6 less points available, but the
Mm-hmm.
deck's still gonna be playable.
Yeah.
But now because they have a point, VFD's dead.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is the person who's creative gets rewarded for being creative, which is a good thing. But at the same time, they can then go and hit it effectively and kill the degenerate thing. It's not like it's going to be like current where we're going to be stuck with the artifact lock now for the next 4 months until they
Yeah.
potentially hit it.
Yeah.
And so it balances that nicely. And if they, especially as you see the first few months, if they go and hit things effectively, we're like, okay, we're going to kill the VFD deck, we're going to kill the Yugioh deck. What it also means is that if someone has, a good event with this deck, a degenerate strategy, people aren't just going to flock towards it because it's like, well, that's not going to last for another month, and so people don't need to kind of go and play this guessing game of whether they're going to go and pick up these cards and play the degenerate strategy. Locals are just going to, oh no, like it's going to be gone in 2-3 weeks.
Yeah.
That's neat, and we're just going to move on and continue to play whatever hopefully fair decks that we've been playing before.
Yeah. And also it doesn't really I don't feel like it's discouraging to players who like to come up with ideas like this as well, because your solution of just putting like a couple of points on like 1 or 2 of the generator cards, in theory you could go and try to find the next thing like it, right? Like if you are like a deck builder who likes to cook up some crazy stuff, you could go back to the lab and try to find the next way to abuse VFD if you really wanted to, right? Until eventually you reach all the you've put 1 point on every single level 9 monster in the game, I suppose. But yeah, I do think that is an interesting trade-off, because I mean, at least I don't have many positive things to say about VFD, but at least this deck has to be playing all of the budget staples in the format. This is not like a tier 1 deck in Advanced Constructed being able to play the Floodgate and play Fuva, Ash, Imperm, Nib, and so on. Like this deck has to friggin' go and play Dark Ruler in the main, has to play Upstart Goblin, has to play a searchable Kaiju, has to side deck like DD Crow, Budget, Denko Sekka, and so on and so forth. Like the things you've mentioned, like this deck has to make concessions to be playable in Genesys. And to an extent, this is, I guess, the to the spirit of the format, right? This is what they intended with this, right? Otherwise, VFD wouldn't have been 100 points if they don't want people to at least be able to theoretically do this.
I think the first time you see combos like this, it's cool. It's when you have to sit with it for the next 4 months that it gets
right.
Really late.
I think that's a fair point. The only exception is if like every single event someone comes up with something to ruin it, I suppose. I think that's the danger, I guess. But from looking at YCS Anaheim, I feel like there's not that much of this, right? There's not like 15 different flavors of FTKs in this top cut. It is the one generator discovery, and the rest is normal decks, basically, for the most part, right? And so, yeah.
The thing with the generator one as well is like a lot of cards in my side deck are just generically fine into it. Like I had XYZ Encore in my side deck, and so it's like even then it's like if you don't respect it, a lot of the generic cards of the format will be fine. Or imagine you sit down, you play against a trap deck, you VFD them turn 1, and they just go into set 5.
Yeah.
So even then, just the diversity of the format will like limit how much these degenerate strategies can do overall. So there's even a world that maybe someone finds something somewhat degenerate, but then it just gets checked by the meta a bit.
Right.
Being a bit diverse and having these turn skip cards not be quite as powerful in Genesis as it is in current.
Mm-hmm. I have the impression that they are currently taxing hand traps a lot more than board breakers, because it feels like basically every somewhat playable hand trap, with the exception of DD Crow, has at least some points. Whereas with board breakers, it feels like they're a lot more lenient. I personally agree with that. I think that creates more fun gameplay. But is there any certain staple that you felt like either a board breaker that should cost some more points, or either a hand trap that should cost some less points because of how they were over or underperforming?
Um, I'm not sure on that, and I think there's other outliers. Like I think there's cards like Terraform that can go down.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the generic searchers, the whole reason they're really good in standard is because there's zero cost associated with them. They're just efficiency cards and a
Yeah.
toolbox card. But as soon as you put any points on them at all, they
Yeah.
immediately kind of lose a bit of their strength in the sense that they now have a cost.
Yeah. I have no
And
idea
terraforming,
how little points would Rhoda have to be to put it in Vanquish Soul, you think?
I mean, if something like 10, 15, I think you can consider. It depends how much the other Vanquish Soul cards are as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's
But
far
I
off
think,
from that. It's like 40 or something.
yeah, but I think that's kind of the point that they don't want to do. Whereas, like, if you have a tier 1 deck, I don't think you should have access to the generic staples that make your deck more consistent.
Right.
I think it's like if you're playing a lower power level deck, then it's better.
Yeah.
And so maybe there's some decks in current, which I can't actually think of any right now, but maybe like the meta of Genesis that want to play like terraformings.
Yeah.
But because their deck is good and has points, they can't play terraforming. But if you play something like Guru Control, um, it's gonna be holy. There's not gonna be any floods because all the floods are hit very hard. You're just playing like your set trap deck, maybe some power spells.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because you're not burning all your points on the engine, you can then afford to play Terraforming to have extra copies of Hidden City. And I
Right.
think, or same with a warrior deck. If you're playing like an older warrior deck that doesn't have any points on it, well, now I can go and afford to play warriors and have a toolbox because my engine is weaker.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what they should lean towards, where you have these kind of consistency cards available for weak archetypes that can like the consistency.
Yeah.
But if you're a better archetype where you don't, where you have to use points on your engine, then you don't get these more extra consistency and flexible
Yeah.
cards.
I mean, I think there's certainly cards. I think they need to find a sweet spot basically for a lot of these cards where some of them at the moment are costed to a point where 33 points is a terraforming right now, and I think that essentially just makes terraforming way too unattractive to even see play. And that's generally something I don't think you want for cards. I think you want the cards to be an option when you're deck building, but something you have to actually give up something else for, right? Like if I look at terraforming and it's 33 points and I'm like, okay, well, that's not attractive to play at all. That's not interesting because then you're not really making a decision in deck building. And when terraforming is 2 points, then you're also not making a decision because you're auto including it, right? I think for a lot of cards, they're going to try, or I think they should try to find like that kind of sweet spot where it feels worth it, but you do have to weigh it against other options. Like I think something like, for example, Pot of Greed at 30 is actually a pretty good starting point like that, because I've considered putting Pot of Greed at 3 in some decks that I've built just because, that card is crazy. But I'm basically giving up all my points to play 3 copies of those. So I can't do it in every deck, and I have to really consider, is this worth it, I would never have that consideration about terraforming at the moment. Like, of course, I'm not going to put 3 terraformings in a deck. I'd put 3 Pot of Greeds in any deck before I put 3 terraformings. Like, there's no way I'm using 99 points on 3 terraformings. And so I think like the problem is, I guess it's harder to future proof like that, because a lot of the newer archetypes these days are going to have a field spell. So if terraforming is 15 points, maybe Guru will play 3 copies of it, but every new deck you're going to have to put points immediately, essentially. Otherwise, the new archetype with 3 terraforming is going to go crazy, right? Like, you're going to have to basically put points instantly on field spells.
I think that the nice thing is you can kind of, well, you don't have to future-proof things as much because there's going to be so many lists. Like, ideally, if we're getting a list every month, having a month of a deck run wild isn't the end of the world.
Right.
It's not like we're going to be stuck with it for 4 months, and they don't have to feel bad about, like, hitting it down.
Yeah.
And the other thing with that is, like, if I go and pick up a new deck, I know it's not just going to die very quickly, or I don't have to, like, worry about every single ban list of, like, oh, is my deck going to be dead or not after that. Like, they can do a very Master Duel-esque way of hitting things where it's like, okay, it gets hit once now, and then it hits again. And then every time it's getting reevaluated. And you always ideally get them to a point where the deck is functional, but people who want to play a deck will play it, not just everyone's playing it for the power level sake.
Right. Yeah, eventually those deck they'll reach a point where once that's the same thing, right? You don't want the deck to be hit to the point where it's unplayable in Genesis format. You just want the cost associated with it to be so high that it's balanced now, but still an option. Which technically, if you always go up and down in points based on whether the deck is seeing play or not, you should eventually reach that point where you found the sweet spot where now the deck is fine to play but not crazy to play. Which I think is the interesting approach about this point system as well, because it gives you the ability to do this without like hitting a deck in Genesys feels different than hitting a deck in TCG. I've talked about that when I'm doing like ban list suggestions in the TCG, it always feels a lot harsher. You know, it's always like, okay, this card is now banned or this card is now at 1, and then there's like a clear outcome of this of like, okay, the deck is probably now not good anymore, or it still is very good. And very often we are in that sort of dilemma where hitting a card in TCG either does everything or it does nothing. There's a lot of things that you either ban it and then the deck dies, or you don't hit it properly and then the deck stays pretty much the best deck. And it's hard to find that balance with the TCG ban list system, but I feel like it's easier with Genesys, especially with more frequent updates as well, because it allows for smaller updates. But like hitting a card, I talked about that. I think my example was the Radiant Typhoon deck, like because I was talking about whether the Radiant Typhoon deck should get some points, and it's like putting points on Radiant Typhoon Crocia does in no way, shape, or form like kill that deck. Like let's say you put 10 points on Radiant Typhoon Crocia, all that this deck list has to do is take out one Pot of Greed. It doesn't actually have to like take out the card that you're targeting. You're not actually telling them exactly what to do. You're not telling them do not play Crocia or play less Crocia. You're just telling them, hey, this Crocia card is going to cost you a Pot of Greed if you want to play 3 copies of it. And I think that is a much more interesting way of balancing a deck. And it's also that, like you said, that never forces you to give up a deck completely. Like if you want to play your Crocias that you've bought, you can. You just have to adjust your deck accordingly.
Yeah, I think it's better on a lot of fronts. Like it's just better in terms of it feels better for players because they're not getting screwed out of buying a deck and then it dying immediately.
Yeah.
It feels better for people who aren't playing the deck because now they have more faith this deck is going to get hit,
Yeah.
like consistently. It's also just I think easier to land on a sweet spot because one of the big things is like we look at GCGs, the standard game. It's like the lists are so far apart. What ends up happening is that you kind of need these big lists to do something because if you miss the mark and they don't do enough, then it just feels awful when we have the same deck for that every 4 months.
Yep.
But it's that's not the case with Genesis because you have more updates. And the nice thing is you can even do this with tech cards and like terraforming example where you can just start taking 5 points off terraforming every list for the next
until people start playing it, but not like in every deck. Yeah.
And if people start playing in every deck, then it's like, okay, cool, we just bump it up. And
like we went too far. Yeah.
Extravagance, where it's like we're just gonna bump this point up. If they bring it to 30 points, then no one plays it. They can just go bring it down later on. Yeah. And so it does take a lot of effort to go and balance this correctly, but I think it's very, very manageable. And it's something that's like very player friendly.
It also it takes effort in terms of like you need to identify the decks that need to be hit or identify the cards that need to be hit. But in another way, it's also not that hard actually, because like you said, like you take off points if people start playing it, you put points back on. Like, and you will reach a point where it's now costed appropriately, right? Because it's not that hard. Like people play it, you put on you put on points, people stop playing it, you go down a little bit, and it's like, well, you know, kind of like it almost drives itself basically because you can see what kind of cards are now a good deal for players and which kind of cards aren't.
We do need more events to have effective data. Like I'm not sure how much they're going to look at like third party platforms where they play people can play Genesis on. I'm not sure they're going to actually go that far and look. It wouldn't surprise me if they do because like I said, and Konami NA is involved with it more. And so like
they did say in one of the articles they did say they were even going to monitor like how people talk about the format online. So it makes it seem like they're pretty involved. And even in this article, they said like they were expecting more Onomat to be played, and then it wasn't because people were afraid of Flying Sea. So it feels like something they follow, but that's obviously something we're going to have to wait and see if that's like just, if that's true and they're going to put that into action or what.
The one thing that'll be interesting is whenever they do the Genesis YCS, I think that'll have a better showing of like the meta and like what the game really offers. Because I think a lot of people who came, like a lot of people did come for Genesis. But I don't necessarily think it was like they were grinding this format on DB and trying to like min max their deck, have the best chance. Like this is just something they enjoy, and this is how they chose to compete. And I think like lack of Automat because that's very much a current deck. So people maybe didn't want to play it for sake of fun. I think once you have like the YCS, where a lot of the other good players, like the larger pool of them that would normally play in the current event, come and play in this format, I think it'll be a very, very interesting event. Like there'll be a
Yeah.
lot of deck lists and innovation for that one.
Yeah.
I think that's really good. And most of the players I've talked to, not all, but a lot of them are like they just love Yu-Gi-Oh, so more
Yeah.
Yu-Gi-Oh is not a problem for them. And so when they go in and then play, like have a reason, excuse to play this, then
Hmm.
they'll by all means try coming up with something interesting. So I think that will be a
Yeah.
very interesting YCS to see and how that turns out.
Yeah. It feels close enough to modern Yu-Gi-Oh where if the YCS happens, even someone who may have not been super into Genesis prior might still give it a go just because, why not? Like it's a YCS, it's still going to be a prestigious event. And I can really see, I mean, this is somewhat something I'm hoping for, but I can really see this YCS being like pretty big actually. Like I don't necessarily think this would be a smaller event than a regular YCS. Hopefully, that's really what I'm hoping for because I have a lot of faith in this format and I really want this format to take off. Um, and I really don't want the YCS to be like a one-time thing. Like at the moment, I'm considering going to that YCS, and I normally don't travel to any YCSs. I really hope we're gonna get Genesis YCSs in Europe as well. But I think a lot of it depends on the future. Like how is this received? How big is this YCS going to be, and so on and so forth. But I really don't hope. I really hope it's not going to be like the 3v3 thing where that's an exclusive event to the US basically, and we've never had one in EU. So yeah,
Speaking of 3v3, another cool thing you can do is you could have something with like player A, B, and C at playing different
yeah.
formats. And so you could have like player A playing current, you could play player B playing Genesis, and player C playing like Edison. I don't know if they bring back time wars like that, but you could have something like that,
Yeah, yeah.
which would also be very neat. I think.
It'd be very unique. I think that'd be very specific to the point where I don't know how big that YCS would be because it's very hard to like find. Maybe it's not that hard to find. I would play in that YCS, but I don't know. It'd be very interesting for sure. I thought you were going to mention something else. I thought you were going to mention like a 3v3 with like a shared point pool, like a 100 between the three of you or 300 between the three of you or something like that.
Yeah, one person's playing full power tier, the other two have 0 points.
The other two are playing generator.
Poor player A playing against the tier player.
So where do
I mean,
you
yeah, there's a
put
lot of cool
where do
things
you put the Shizu tier player? Is it the middle or where does he go?
C. I don't B or A. I think it's the valid options. I feel C is the guy that wants to chill. So don't give him the tier player.
And then you predict the position of the other team's tier player and put like a someone with like all anti-tier cards in there. He's got the main deck Skullmeister, main deck DD Crow, main deck D Fissure, which are all 0 points, and they actually have a chance of beating it. Speaking of D Fissure, any cards that you are surprised are no points or low points, and you would hope for more points in the future? Like I'm thinking mainly, how do you feel about Dimensional Shifter and so on and so forth?
I think the floodgates naturally are a problem, and they've hit a lot of them, but they haven't hit all of them.
Yep.
A few things to make note of is like the format's very different, and so
Yep.
for like right now we have the MST deck being very good, and I think
Yep.
it's even like getting splat. I think it'll be splashed into more engine,
Yep.
like into more other engines. Like I think you can play that in Memento. I think Pac was playing
Yeah,
it
I
in that
saw
deck.
Pac playing that in Memento. Yeah.
I saw a Pearly player doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so like if every deck just has a searchable MST, the floodgate isn't as bad.
Yep.
Like obviously you kind of have this game of just draw the out.
Yep.
But the other hand of side of things, it's like D-Fissure does impact a very specific amount of decks now. It's not like every deck's trying to combo turn one. Like
Yep.
you sit down versus a trap deck, activate D-Fissure, do your combo, they just go set 5. You're looking at this D-Fissure, and you're not feeling
Yep.
good about it right now.
Yep.
And so while I do think that it being 0 points is a bit unnecessary, I don't think they need to like ban stuff like D-Fissure or Droll or Shifter.
Right.
Or by ban I mean like have them certain amount of
100.
points on.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially something like Droll, where it's like if you're playing a more majority format, like Droll in a lot of decks just isn't good. Like you don't want Droll in your deck because you're trying to play a grind game, and so going
Mm-hmm.
-1 the first turn of the game just like stall your opponent a little bit doesn't actually accomplish your goal. From some
Yep.
decks it might be fine. Like you're playing a heavier combo deck, like the Droll is perfect. But I think like something like Droll can exist and it can be fine. The format just like maybe a bit higher than it is. I think right now it's at 7. It can go up a bit, but it also depends on
Droll's five.
how people are playing it. Volts Drill side, yeah. So it can
Droll
probably go
went
up a bit.
Droll went down from 7 to 5, which I think
Interesting.
it was the first update, and I think honestly I have a theory on why that happened because the first update, two of the major things they did was reduce Droll and put a bunch of points on some of the stuff that people were using to Exodia FTK. So I feel like Droll is supposed to be like a failsafe in the beginning, just in case someone discovers like a crazy thing that they've missed in the preparation phase for Genesys format. Like, what if someone finds a crazy deep draw FTK or whatever? You know, at least people are going to be playing Droll because it's cheap, kind of thing. I feel like it's how I feel about Droll at the moment. Like, I think it's kind of fine like that. I would still like to see it a little bit more expensive than 5, but I think I can live with the fact that Droll is in this format, somewhat.
I think the big thing as well is like if you have diverse formats, it just is the point where floodgates are bad in general because there's just so many different decks,
Yep.
and so then you'll have like a much more specific type of deck play like these kind of floodgate turn skip hand traps. I think it's fine because like they're doing it because they don't have their decks are largely engine, and so they just want a chance against the other kind of engine heavy combo decks. And when they play
Right.
against more mid range decks, they can just go, okay, I'm gonna take the draw out. I'm gonna play a fair game of Yugioh. And so like Joel's one of those cards where a lot of people hate and they think it ruins the format. I think it's more the reverse, where Joel's good in formats that are like kind of already toxic.
Yep.
And so that's a card I don't mind seeing around. Shifter can again go up as well, but
Yeah.
like these are cards where it's like it doesn't feel that their existence just ruins the format.
It doesn't ruin the
Which is
format, but it definitely ruins certain decks, I feel like. Because I can tell you from the perspective of trying to make some of the wackier decks work, that even if Shifter or Droll weren't a thing, they wouldn't be like the best deck in the format or anything. Like Dragon Rulers is an example of this, like a deck that one of the first decks that I built. Even if you're never hit with a Droll or a Shifter, that deck is not the best deck in the format. It's playable, but it's not like insane. But like just the thought of being hit with a Droll or a Shifter makes that deck almost entirely unplayable. And I was in your camp with Droll and Lockbird. I think it's okay if people side deck Droll and Lockbird for crazier strategies. Shifter, I feel differently about because I think Shifter is way broader than Droll and Lockbird. It is way better against a lot more strategies, I think. Like even against some trap decks or some spell heavy decks or whatever, where you would like, okay, maybe the Di-Fi or the Droll wouldn't be that good. I think Shifter is just almost it's good against everything that isn't Odeon, basically. And so I think Shifter should have more points. I think 10 is outrageous for Shifter.
I agree with that sentiment. I think the problem as well with Shifter is like when very gas heavy decks playing, like if I have Vanquish Soul,
Yeah.
I Shifter them and then I start doing Vanquish Soul stuff, feels really bad. But like
Yeah.
if I'm playing a trap deck where all my points are in Shifter as my go second card,
that's fine. Yeah.
It doesn't feel as bad. So I think it's again like you want to have a relation with the tech cards and the decks that are playing them.
Yeah.
Because if I get shifted and my opponent sets 5, that goes.
That's fine. No, that's fine. That my opponent just wants to play it, wants a chance to play the game in that case, right? But I've been shifted mostly by Ritual Beast, Exosister, and Vanquish Soul, and those decks are pretty fast.
Yeah.
For Genesys standards, it's like they capitalize on that turn that they get. They go and almost kill you or establish a really powerful board.
Yeah. So I can, and again, like, is that a problem with the other engines being too low or Shifter being too low? And I think it's more so Shifter.
Yeah.
But I think even Shifter being something like 2025, I think can be manageable because then like a lot of the other good decks aren't gonna be able to play it.
I think I'm at the point where I would like Shifter to go to 20 to 30 at some point in the beginning, and I honestly think there's going to be, depending on where the format is at any given moment. Like let's say if they put points on Odeon and people play more spell and monster focused strategies, I think even at 20 points, people are going to consider playing Shifter in like Exosister. It's not that crazy of a thought to put 60 points into Shifter if it's good against all the other decks in the format. Like they main deck the Thunder King Ryu for 20 points in this Exosister list that I'm looking at right now, which is wild. So they could have afforded 60 points for Shifter, I think.
Talking about Odeon, I think is also a question because like the question is, do you just want to hit all the decks that are having success? And they've said no. But I think like you kind of want to have decks that are like a baseline power level where what the format wants to be.
Yeah.
And so, for example, like Odeon is a good example of that. Like, I think this deck is pretty healthy overall. It snowballs pretty quickly, but I think it has clear weaknesses, especially like a lot of people main Cosmics and STs.
Mhm.
Another deck I would like to see go down and kind of be like a mainstay of the form would be something like Sword Soul. I think people really enjoy
Yeah.
that power level. It's even
Yeah.
lower
Sword
than what it was.
Sword also feels like the perfect power level for Genesis format.
I think that's
It's,
like a very good deck to just advertise as well, because that's something like players can understand. Like if you're looking at
yeah.
Genesis and you see a game with Sword Soul, where it's like
Yeah.
I end with like my normal two synchros trap setup, they
Yeah.
crack that, you play on the crash spec. I think that's a very um
I
healthy power
think
level.
I
So I
think Sword Soul could almost be 0 points for most of the stuff because like they won't have Baron. Uh, okay, what's the hold on? What's the Sword Soul? What's Sword Soul at the moment? Let me. Where's the
it's
list?
pretty high. It's pretty unnecessarily high.
So Sword Soul. Yeah. Okay. Come on. So Emergence is 33. Yugioh is 33. Moyi is 3, and Longyan is 5. Like that's crazy. I think they should just. I think honestly, making it so that the deck has some points and can play Baron and Protoss is probably already good enough.
Yeah.
Ashina is also Ashina has points even though they don't have a link for it. Ashina has why does Ashina have 33 points?
There's some weird hits on here, like Hidden City has like 33 right now.
Which card?
Um, Hidden City.
Okay, I get that though. I vibe with that. I don't like. I don't. But that's more personal than I actually agree with it. Yeah.
I mean, I
I
think
just,
Guru is a very cool strategy because all the floodgates are hit, and so now you actually
actually,
just have
that's
to
a
play
fair
like
point. You know, no, that's actually a good point. Without the floodgates, maybe it's fine. Yeah.
I played Guru round one, and I was talking to him, and he was very upset that I could play 3 Holy Sues for less cost than his Hidden City, which is I
That
think a
that
crazy
that
statement.
is fair enough. You know, like if you put it like that, I actually think they have a point.
But like I think like Guru is a deck that like another power level deck where I think is very reasonable. Like I'm
Yeah.
playing stuff like Crackdown, Solemns, like maybe I play Super Poly and stuff like that. But like that seems like a very fair
Yeah.
grindy s deck that's very
Yeah.
cool to play. So, but I think that's one thing. Like they want to figure out where the power level wants to be, and then you're gonna have decks around that power level that are seeing play that don't get hit.
Yeah.
And I think Exorcist is probably around that power level as well. Where like
Mm-hmm.
Exorcist may be a mainstay of the format, and you really don't need to hit too much on it. Like maybe a
Yeah.
bit, but like I think Exorcister or like Sword Soul, Odeon, these are decks where like if they're popular, we can be fine and happy with that. Like we don't need to hit them
Yeah.
down to the point where they're not seeing
Yeah.
play. Or if they do, it's like they don't have to do it every list. Try and make that perfect. It's like let them stay for a while and then
Yeah.
worry about it.
I think you get that result though, even if you put small amounts of points on these decks. I think that's I think actually that's the best way to do it. Probably is like just put like 5 to 10 points on like a few key cards, like maybe on 2 different cards you put 5 or 10 points, and so it's like okay, well, I can play this deck, but if I want to play this deck, I look at it as like these decks have a little bit of a smaller budget than if you choose to play them. If they've been a mainstay in the format for a longer period of time, it's like okay, you want to play an Exo Sister deck, your Martha is 10 points. So you don't have 100 points available to your budget. You have 70 now if you choose this deck. And I think you can still definitely play it at that point threshold. And then also, I guess with Exo Sister in particular, I really have no issue because I played against it. And literally the only cards that annoyed me were Shifter and Drone Lockbird. Like it was just the fact that that deck was basically able to play those cards. And I guess it depends how you look at it. Were they able to play Shifter and Droll because all their engine is 0 or because Shifter and Droll are too cheap? I guess you could argue for both.
Yeah, I think it's both. Way you want to hit a little bit on the Exo Sisters.
Yeah, it's like
I
you
think
need to do a combination though, because if you just put Shifter to 20, then Exo Sister can still play Shifter no problem. It's like the same deck as before. They just cut other non-engine for it, like they take out the Thunder King, or like you need to do like a little bit of increase on Shifter so it remains a playable card, but is heavily costed, and you need to put a little bit of points on Exo Sister. So in the combination, it's not either. It's not. I don't know if I want it to be impossible. I think in an ideal world, I'm looking at Shifter as like a card where if you want to play Shifter Exo Sister, you should probably be playing like you get just Shifter. That's it.
yeah, I think that's reasonable. Taking up all your points, something like 33.
Yeah, so like Shifter, yeah, either Shifter 33, but I could also live with Martha 10 and Shifter 20 or something like that.
If we make Martha 10 and Shifter 30, then I was right all along about playing 2 shifters in this deck.
No, do you know what's crazy? I think people probably cut Martha then and play like 7th Tachyon and more 7th Ascension. You probably don't cut shifter. It's the crazy thing. You just play like one Martha and more searches for it.
Some Takken is a card though that I think is quite overrated in the format early on. Just because it's a very generic searcher, but I think it's a bad card.
I
Like
think
it's
it's
very neg one.
it is neg one, but I think in certain decks I like it a lot. I think in Vanquish Soul it definitely has a place. Either that or Small World, but I think they're both like for that discussion, they're basically the same card, right? They're both like a -1 searcher. I think in certain decks where one very key card is getting you a lot of advantage, I think in that deck you probably should be playing something of that nature. Did you
I
play
think
Small World or Seven Tachyon in Vanquish Soul or neither?
I played Small World. I think I played one of it.
Mm-hmm.
My list is very similar to this one. The difference is I didn't play Crows. I played Vados in the main.
I
That
like that.
card was the best card of the day. It was insane.
Yeah.
And then side deck, I had some interesting techs. I had Gordian Slicers, which is a free card, which
Ooh.
I think is very, very good in the format.
Yeah.
Especially because a lot of decks are like some of the automatic decks are like setting the counter trap. And so Gordian Slicer just sends the game versus that, regardless of the counter trap. I also had Mellotronus for the mirror.
Mm.
I think those were the only really spicy things
Is
there. But
Metaltronus 0?
yes.
Ooh.
So I think there's those are kind of the more spicy things. It's funny, the day one I kind of just had whatever in my I had in my deck in my box to make this format and
Yeah.
played it. Like my side deck was complete nonsense, and then like when I was going to day two, I was like, okay, you actually need to figure out the side deck and fix it up a bit. But Vados was by far the best card in the
Yeah,
game. That
I
card
talked
was
about that earlier because I saw it in, I think the Archmage deck was running it, and I thought about it. It's like that card is pretty crazy right now. I mean, of course, it's hard to predict how that's going to shape up in the future because it just so happens that at the moment, like, it's good against Vanquish Soul, it's good against Odeon, it's good against Generator, it's good against Runic Fountain in the Radiant Typhoon deck, and it's really good against Archmage. And
I
you would
think
probably
that's
find more examples too.
the Punk Field spell. Yeah, there's a lot of examples.
Yeah. And I mean, in
And that's
Vanquish
kind of
Soul,
nice.
you can even make use of it in your own. Like, you don't even need to rely on your opponent sometimes. Like, I've played Vados. I played Vados at Euros this year in Vanquish Soul, and there's like some game states where in the opponent's turn, you're like, okay, I have a field spell, you have a full board, have my Vados in my Raisin column that you've played around this entire turn, and you've left it open, so I'll put the Vados there and pop it, and that just blows up the entire board.
Yeah, the one game I played against Odia in top 16, he like full comboed with double super poly, and it was a very I fooed him. That's my other tech card. I played foo in the main just because I was more worried about the combo decks than the control decks, so I didn't care about having the deck card. Because I think Vanquish just naturally eats the control decks.
Right.
But yeah, he full combo with double super poly, and then I think I got 2 draws off the Fua, so I hard drew the Snow Devil, and like he just stopped me completely on my turn. And then it was just like on his turn, I'm like, oh, here's Vados because he had to super poly the mana away, and then it's like, oh, I'm gonna summon Raisin to this zone and just nuke the board, and then like I was able to stabilize
Yeah.
there. That was a very enjoyable game.
Yeah.
I think like I mean you have those types of game in current. You definitely have grindy games in current, but I think that this format allows for a bit more of the grindy games. Like I was going around, there's a lot of people playing like Fire King, was a somewhat popular deck, or even the Radiant Typhoon deck, where it's like they're meant to grind for a fair few turns, which is cool.
How was Fuva in general? Now that you said that you played it, how do you feel about Fuva in this format? Because it feels more hit or miss than in Advanced Constructed, or rather, it feels like a very good side deck card to me, and I haven't really made up my mind yet about using my points in the side deck. So far, I've usually tried to use my points in main and extra because in my head it's like, okay, I'm gonna get more mileage out of those cards if have a chance to see them in like all 3 games.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment a lot. Where I don't want to have any points in my side deck at all. The reason I played Fua was just because of VS's matchup spread, where you are insane to control decks, and I feel perfectly comfortable having a dead card. Or you can just stack game one if I draw Fuas.
Yep.
And then just touring them on the back. I think the matchups are just super good. The problem is when people go super large combo, then I lose. And I guess there's argument to play Droll over Fua, but I think that Fua just plays the Vanquish Soul strategy better, where it's like, I'd rather you make a half board, I get some cards, and just crack with VS Engine. So for the context of VS, I think it was insane. But I don't think it's like an insane card in the format. I think it's fine, but it's, again, like, you're choosing your tech cards to work with the engine. As
Do you think it's fairly costed at 7?
It's kind of hard to say because I felt like it was insane in my deck, but if you hit VS down and then maybe it is fine. Like I don't think there's. I'll put it like this. I think it's insane in VS, but I don't know if that's because VS is insane or that card's insane. If I
Right.
play another deck, I don't think I'm playing Fua in it.
Okay. And there wasn't
So
that much Fuva here, and there's also
no.
another card I wanted to bring up that the Odeon deck actually played, but I didn't see it in many other decks. And that is the Archmage deck also had two of it, but that's Nibiru. And I saw a lot of the combo or heavier decks. You said earlier, like one board breaker and they don't have any follow up or whatever. One thing I noticed for a lot of the combo decks that people were playing on stream is like most of them would have completely gotten destroyed by one Nibiru simply because you can really tell that a lot of these combo decks just don't have the ability to slap Appaloosa or Baron or whatever else. And like some of them just don't have the best backup plans under Nibiru. So I've really been wondering. I haven't seen it in a lot of decks. And I also don't think you played it. Hearing your like some of the, I don't think you had points for it left. But I don't know. Nib at 10 points. I'm not quite sure if it's at that point yet where it's actually like a really good option for people to consider as a counter to combo strategies. It feels like if you're trying to counter all in combo decks, people would rather go for Fuva or Droll, which in my opinion is correct if those cards are cheaper than Nibiru. At the same time, I feel like the gameplay that Nibiru provides might be more desirable than what Droll provides, if that makes sense.
I think the one big thing is how much better Nib is going first a lot of times.
Right.
So maybe if you're playing like a very mid-rangey deck, you want to play Nib more just to stabilize. Because sometimes you still die through a Droll.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the deck. I mean, I guess it depends because it's the format's so new. I don't know how well they interact. I think it's like reasonably priced at 10. I mean, the thing is like the problem with both Droll and Nib is they're just dead into any of the control decks of the format. I guess Droll
Yeah.
has better coverage because at least that's good into something like Odeon.
Yeah. But that leads
But
me
I think
to the point of like I think 10 points is too much for a card that I would rather side deck than main deck. I'm not willing to spend 30 points on a side deck card. I might be willing to spend like 15 to 20 on 3 nips in my side deck, depending on the deck that I'm playing, just to cover for some combo heavier matchup, like people are doing with Fuva and Droll. You know, you main deck Fuva, but a lot of people were side decking Droll and or Fuva in certain decks. Droll is in side decks a decent amount, and I saw Fuva in some side decks as well. Where it's like it seems like anywhere from 5 to 7 is like the sweet spot for cards to still be side deckable, quote unquote, because I'm not throwing like 30 points and upwards into my side deck.
yeah, I think there's an argument to make Nib smaller. But it's
No.
also like you also have to see what the meta develops like
Right.
because if we just end up having a lot of like the MST deck and Odeon, then it doesn't matter how many points it's at. Like it won't be played much. I mean, if it's at 0, obviously be sided. But
Right.
the other thing I think is that I think we need to move away from looking at cards as like you're playing 3 of it. Like we play 3 of it
Right.
for in current because it's nice and like it makes sense. If this is the best card for the job, you want 3 of it.
Yeah.
But as soon as you have the point system evaluated, you have to evaluate things very differently. Where it's like maybe I am just playing 2 nib because I
Right.
don't need like I don't ever want to see the 2 of them and like it's just for specific matchups.
Mm-hmm.
And so you may end up getting things weird. I can see Nip going down, but then I
Yeah.
may see more play. Like especially if it gets more combo oriented, then it gets better. So it's a weird relationship because now it's like cards like Nib, you're not even evaluating their power level with respect to like the deck you're playing. You're evaluating with respect to the metagame.
Yeah.
And so it just depends on how much you want to see this card. Like you
Yeah.
think this is a healthy card or not. And I think Nib's fairly healthy, but
Yeah.
you know if it's being seen some play right now, I think it's somewhat reasonably statted. If it goes down 3 points, I think it's also fine.
Yeah, I kind of see it similar to Fuva in terms of power level. I think a 7 is where I'd like to see it. For now, because it really does seem like a card that in the main deck it only hits very few matchups at the moment. But it seems like a solid fail safe kind of card, like what Droll is supposed to be. Like when there are certain decks running around that are doing way too much, then you want Nibiru to be a viable option for people to put into their decks. And I feel like at 10 points, it's kind of like, yeah, I can play 2 for 20, which I guess is fine in that sense, in some decks, but it still feels weird to play a card that costs 10 points that's only good in some matchups.
I think the one thing that they're trying to avoid is just having all the hand traps be like low enough where you can just start playing hand trap piles.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, because I think that's what they want to avoid. I don't think hand trap piles are inherently toxic, but I think they want to kind of steer away from that as much as possible. You can play decks with like 12 hand traps. I think it's fine,
Mhm.
but I don't think that they want to get to the point where we're now just playing like 18.
Do you is it better? Do you reach that point? But don't you reach that point by just making like I would argue the reason why people aren't playing that many hand traps is not because they're too expensive, but because it's not optimal, because it's not necessary in the format, because it's not actually good. Like I was gonna mention cards like Effect Veiler and Imperm, which I'm going through all of these deck lists. None of these decks is playing Veiler or Imperm. Is that because Veiler and Imperm are too expensive, or is that because they're just not as effective at dealing with this format? Where it's like Archmage, Odeon, Radiant Typhoon, whatever, like Exo Sister, like those are, I don't think those are decks you need to Veiler for a -1.
Well, let me ask this question then. Do you think that if Veiler and Imperm were 0, they'd see play? I think
Yes.
Imperm would 100% see play. Veiler,
Yes.
maybe not. So like I think the cards are still useful.
Yes.
They're just too high for the given form. Like what if we're
Right.
5 now? And so
I
I
think
think that
Veiler is 7. Veiler is like very close to 5.
Imperm's a
Or it
bit
is
more.
5. I'm not sure. It's 5 or 7.
Imperm's a bit more, so that's the one to
Imperm is
consider.
13. Yeah, Imperm is 13.
To go back to the question is like, do I think it's the format? It's like somewhat, but
Yeah.
like it's both things. It's the points and the format.
Mm-hmm.
But as the format evolves and like you had different decks, like if I think that keeping those cards in general, just trying to avoid the hand trap piles, isn't
Yeah.
something that I'm overly upset that they're doing.
No, me neither. I mean, I do think they should not be 0 points to try and avoid that. Do you think with the same logic that like every realistically playable hand trap should be some points? Like should they throw like a solid like 1 or 2 or 3 points on something like DD Crow and Skullmeister and Vados? Just because like I feel like very much what you said is true. Like if Veiler was 0, they would play it, and I'm saying that because people are playing cards like Skullmeister, Crow, and Vados almost solely for the reason that they are free to play anyway. So you might as well for some of these guys. Like, it feels like cards like Dark Ruler and stuff have like a very specific purpose, and that's why they're being played. Whereas like cards like DD Crow is just like yeah, might as well.
I think you can see both arguments. I don't think there's a correct answer there because again,
Yeah.
it's just like what kind of format do you want to build?
Yeah.
And so if you're fine having some decks exist as hand trap decks, then I think it's fine. Like if you play like your points on Ash, Imperm,
Mm-hmm.
Veiler, then you have some free hand traps to top it off that are like lower power level. I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Where like I don't think you need to like it's weird because you need to have a conscious decision on what you want to make the format be.
Right.
To bring up a League of Legends analogy, which I'm not sure how much you're familiar with it.
I'm a crazy Zeri main.
Okay, there we go. There was a talk from one of the designers talking about whether they should nerf Flash in the early days. So for people who don't play League, you have a choice of 2 summoner spells out of like 12, and basically there's one that's used in like 98% of games of characters, which is called Flash. And there's a question in early days when they're developing the game is like, do we want Flash to exist like this? Like it's way too overpowered, like, or should we just remove it or nerf it to the ground? And one of the designers came up with a question where it's like, the question isn't just we're asking shouldn't just be is this too popular? Is the gameplay that this ability create good? And the answer for Flash is yes. And so for the question of going to Yu-Gi-Oh and hitting
Mm-hmm.
the staples is like if you have cards that create good gameplay, even if they're seeing too much play, it's fine.
Right.
And I think that's kind of the thing with all the hand traps, where I think it becomes a problem when decks are just becoming hand trap piles and they're stopping your opponent from doing
Also,
anything.
that's why they haven't banned Maxi in Master Duel because
Yeah, everyone loves the Maxi game patterns. But I think that's kind of the thing you need to think about when you're talking about hitting cards. Is like, is these cards creating toxic gameplay?
yeah.
And the answer is no. Then if they're seeing play everywhere, then it's fine.
Right.
And I think this is a lot more difficult in Yu-Gi-Oh because it's like the meta changes a lot more. Like the whole way the game plays is completely different depending on what decks are
Mm-hmm.
popular.
Yep.
But I think having some hand traps at 0 are fine, even if they're just staples of the format. I think it's fine existing like that. They can
Mm-hmm.
go and hit it, but I think hitting it doesn't guarantee that the format will get better. So
Right. I'm a fan of the sentiment of purposely basically making some cards cheap if they offer desirable gameplay. I think one of those cards as well, that's just now something, the cards like Dark-Hole, I think are also something, it makes me happy to see cards like Dark-Hole seeing play. And I do feel like for 3 points, it is a pretty solid deal, honestly, in this format, especially for maybe a going second option. Like this is one of those cards that I would consider side decking, even if it's some points in my side deck, but it's only 9 points for a playset of Dark-Holes, and I feel like that is a, because I just like formats where cards like that are viable options to be played, because I feel like the boards that are being made that are weak to Dark-Hole are usually not too oppressive. And so it's like the gameplay behind these board breakers is desirable for the cheaper ones, and so I'm happy that they're cheap. Same with Cosmic Cyclone. I would never want points on Cosmic Cyclone because I think a format in which Cosmic Cyclone is a playable Yu-Gi-Oh card can never be completely out of completely unreasonable. Like if people are choosing to main deck Cosmic Cyclone, from my understanding of Yu-Gi-Oh, I think something is going right.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of cards like that. Like I think Slayer's another good example of that. Where I'm just gonna play like this 1.5 for or 1 for 1.5. Like you get that little bit of edge with it.
Yep.
I think that's fine. I think some of the hand traps, like if you're playing Crow, it can't be that bad either.
Right.
So
right. Yeah. No, actually, it falls under that category. I think. Yeah, I agree with that.
So I think there's as the format develops, they need to decide what kind of text they want. And it can go multiple different ways. You can have multiple different good formats. You can mess it up a little bit sometimes if you overhit things as well. So you have to play by ear. It's hard to give a definite answer whether it'll make the format better or not, whether it should be hit or not.
Yeah. Awesome. I enjoyed that.
Do you want to segue into current just a little bit and contrast?
Oh yeah, sure. Okay, I guess we can talk about Advanced Constructed if you insist.
Don't seem happy about that.
No, it's all right. What is there anything particular you want to talk about?
I think just talking about the differences in the formats, and like what happened at Anaheim to lead to this format that went a bit away from what we all wanted. So I think a lot of people are unhappy with how Anaheim went with the current, like top 8 was just awful.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of that was, I think this is, we kind of go through a cycle with a lot of formats where it's like a new format comes out, new decks, and then we go and say like, oh, we can just play this fair game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Then we go, actually, everyone's playing fair decks. I'm just going to board breaker them to death.
Yep.
And then the next step is, okay, we're going to play degenerate decks to beat the board breakers. And then that was Anaheim, where it's like, we're just playing breakers, or degenerate decks to beat the breakers. And then we go a step further into like a more normal format. Yeah, hand traps again, and people are playing a bit more of the fair decks. Like, as much as Anaheim, the feature matches weren't great, I think it was like a very specific set of the metagame. And I don't think this format is amazing, but I also spent 2 weekends ago playing the DC Cup, which was Razor Malice. And so when people say formats are bad, like nothing will ever be worse than that format. Ever. Like that was the worst experience I have ever had.
Okay, so the like bar, so you're saying TCG seemed pretty good because you're coming off of the Duelist Cup, and so the bar was on the floor, and it was a little better than that.
I dug a hole and put the bar under. Like I don't think people, if you did not play the last DC Cup, I don't think people can understand how bad that format was with not full power Razor, but like like you had hits to some like X, I think was that, and Bonfire.
Yeah.
But it was basically full power otherwise. And Mouse was like full power, like Apollo, Decoder, every name at 3.
Yep.
And so when I look at a form like this in the TCG, there's toxic decks that have a rule that they're playing that goes and forces people to play more fair tech cards. But the other half of the meta is like super good. And so
to an extent, I agree with you, and to an extent, I also think that these sort of dynamics are interesting and should exist. I don't really have a problem when, like, let's say, like, it's natural that 2 decks face off against each other. Like, for example, the top 8 feature match is a great example of this. This is 2 decks going up against each other that very specifically made the call of, like, I'm going to play the most degenerate stuff for going first, and, like, I'm going to have a chance going second naturally against the fair decks in the format because my deck has a very high ceiling. So, like, I'm going to be able to beat Draco Tail going second, like, naturally. I don't have to actually build my deck for that specific situation. I can just build my deck to be as good as powerful, as good as possible for going first. And so you have Triff on like full engine 60 card Mitsuyami going up against like Onomat Ryzeal. And so obviously the dice roll is going to decide that match. I can live with that fact. And I understand that the gameplay that's going to come from that is not as desirable. I think the problem, I guess, I had in that sense is uh how these decks are operating, not what not I'm not mad about the fact that you're trying to build a deck that wins going first. I'm mad about that you're building a deck that wins going first by pro tossing.
I agree with the set. Like, I'm not saying that this format's good,
Yeah.
by any means, but I think that like there's good Yu-Gi-Oh to be played in the
No,
format.
absolutely. And I did say that in my video. Regardless, like I think there is a lot of. I mean, there's a lot of people going through these tournaments with the Draco Tail deck, with the pure Yummy deck, and so on, and they create good games. And even stuff like the Yummy Mitsu deck can create very good game states. You know, like you have a Draco Tail against Yummy Mitsu Rugi or whatever. That's still going to be a fun game to play, and likely also for both players, because the Yummy Mitsu inherently, even if I don't think the engines should work together from a design perspective, I don't think it always creates like terrible games of Yu-Gi-Oh. I think my main frustration with that weekend in particular was more related to lingering floodgates, because it's like even the fair decks are gonna like debarrier each other and stuff like that.
My frustration was the opposite. Admittedly, I didn't play that many rounds, but I think that a lot of the floodgates, while annoying, are a little bit overhyped about how good they are. Like D-Barrier was a card, but I was being a lot testing. Like I had a fairly good run into it with Draco
Okay.
Tail. And my one teammate used to say, he got top 32 Draco Tail. I'm like, how many times did you get D-Barrier? He's like 7. And I beat 5 of those.
Okay.
So I think it's a lot of times they just end the game immediately. But I think if you do have game plans into it, they're not quite as bad.
Right.
The one thing is like I think the degenerate strategies are a bit more annoying, but I think that should get like a little bit less, and we'll have a format that's like half the meta is good, half the meta is like a bit more of these die rolly things, which is fine.
Right.
I saw Herman yelling in your chat about. I'm just assuming he's yelling.
I mean,
I
think the thing is that I do agree with you. I just think like my frustration, or like I'm not saying the game is bad. I'm just saying that this situation where half of the games are good and the other half is coin flips is like something I feel like that we should look to improve. So that's what I'm complaining about. I'm not saying all the Yu-Gi-Oh games are bad. I'm saying like 50% of the Yu-Gi-Oh games are good, and I wish that number was higher.
It could have been avoided. Like this entire
Right.
thing could have been avoided if we had perhaps they take the Genesys philosophy to current.
Right.
The one comment that Herman was making was that like a lot of the hand traps aren't good into like a lot of the combo decks, which I kind of agree with, but not completely. Like I think chummies are good, and I think like cards like Azuna are still very good and will push
Yeah.
off like a half board. Like one of the things going into the event, I ended up playing the branded version of Draco Tail, but
Mm-hmm.
even just playing in some other nonsense on like the Friday is like I really wish I just had Azuna in my Draco Tail deck again. Like I think that's just that paired is very good.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that as the format changes, it will get a little bit better than it was had at Anaheim.
Yeah.
But the other thing, just to segue back to the Genesis quickly, is like I also think that this format right here, where Mitsu Yummy is a deck, where it's like you go first, you under up to your board's basically unbreakable. Even though it can have interesting games, like it's pretty obnoxious when it's at full powers. Like Genesis does a very good job at like keeping these pile decks out, which I think are very toxic a lot of times, where you're just adding on the board of 2 different decks at the same time.
Yeah.
And so like in Genesis, obviously you don't have Mitsu or Yummy, but you could in theory have like deck A and deck B both be functional decks. And I think both Yummy and Mitsu are healthy decks. Mitsu less so, but I think that in a vacuum, both decks individually are healthy decks,
Yep.
and the hybrid's bad. And Genesis,
Yep.
with the way that points are structured, is you just can't play the hybrid.
Yep.
And that's kind of just want to round back to was that the point system is a very effective way of like removing these piles if they're too degenerate.
So you're saying you're saying we should talk about the TCG so we can talk about how good Genesis is in comparison. Is what?
I've gone full flip on my initial viewpoint. I love Genesis. Only Genesis now.
Oh man. No, I think in terms of combo piles, I'm only really frustrated with 2 things, which is the lingering floodgates. I don't have a problem with strong combo boards in general if they have weaknesses. Like I think the Mitsurugi Yami deck, from what it does, is not that bad, because it does struggle into like stuff like Fuva and Dark Ruler, but I feel like that completely gets invalidated by something like Protoss or Mjolnir or whatever in other decks.
Yeah.
And I think the K9 decks in particular are in a very weird spot in the TCG right now for me, because how are you supposed to counter those if it's not specifically for Fuva? Because typically, I don't know, you're supposed to hand trap decks, but that deck is probably one of the best into hand traps I've ever seen, because they've decided to make Ripper like a hand trap negate that you summon basically a summon number 3, and you go like +3 in the process. If you go Jokul reveal Sulfador or some shit, like you're basically fully set up. You go search a card from your deck, you send 2 from your deck to the grave, and then you make a rank 5 that negates further hand traps. And then hand traps aren't the solution if it's not specifically Fuva. And board breakers are also not the solution because you get artifact locked. So like there's no cycle there, right? There's no like, okay, the board breakers beat this deck, so we play board breakers now, and hand traps beat this deck, so we play hand traps now, and so on. Like this deck just, if it goes first, it wins. There's no real development to be made from this. There's no, at least I feel like if Bologna is in 6 weeks and the K9 Crystron deck is one of the most popular decks in the format from now on because it won Anaheim, it feels very hard to solve on that.
I think it will phase out a little bit more. I mean, it'll get more popular than it was, but I think that, like I said, I think Azuna into the K9 decks is very good. Maybe I'm just being a bit too optimistic. But the thing is, like, if people just take breakers out of the main deck, and the Christian deck is getting hit with hand traps every game now instead of like every other game, then it just goes down because the hand traps will connect, or cards like Fool will connect.
Right.
People put Perula back in the main, like that's now you have 6 Chummies versus a deck,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think it will kind of get targeted a bit more and get pushed down just because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Do I think the playstyle is good? No, but I mean, there's a lot of formats we have where there is that toxic combo deck of the format that
Yeah.
forces the other decks to be holy, and so like I think last format was really good because the quote unquote toxic combo deck was VS, which I don't think was that toxic of a deck. Like the end board was insane, but I felt hand traps were very, very reasonable into that deck.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have Christian, which is like a lot more of a toxic deck because it's more all or nothing. But I think so we'll try to play the same role. The problem is VS also kept the floodgates out.
Yep.
Where Christian doesn't. Like that to me is the miss
Mm-hmm.
with at least how the ban list went. But
For sure.
I think the format will balance itself out a little bit to not have quite the level of the
I think K9 Christian would basically be a very even though I wouldn't like the deck, but I think it would be a healthy inclusion in the format to just like exist, because it does, if it just didn't have a way to lock you out of playing and punish you for playing board breakers, because it's like you are not incentivized to hand trap that deck. I don't think so. Like the amount of hand traps you have to draw to stop that deck is insane if we're not talking Fuva. Like you need either it's okay, Nip +1 probably works, but even that they have ways around, I think, because if they start setting up, like the Crystron itself can actually play through Nib fairly well. So if you and they look at your hand, so they know it's there, which is another thing. But in general, if they just weren't able to artifact lock you, then you could say, all right, the deck is powerful, but I might be able to board break it if I play cards like, I don't know, Lava Golem or Dark Ruler or Super Poly. Actually, Super Poly is probably bad against it, but Dark Ruler is pretty good against it. Like there's been games in the previous format where everyone was on Paradise Smasher. A genuine strategy against the K9 decks was sometimes to just not hand trap them, to not make Izuna live, which as a result made it hard for them to Paradise Smasher, because they needed level 5s that weren't off Jockle or Lantern, because those can't be used for Paradise Smasher. So if you just didn't hand trap the deck, it was harder for it to make Paradise Smasher, and so they sometimes wouldn't go for it, and then you could actually beat it with a Dark Ruler. Like I've had games like that in the last format. You can't have those games at the moment because there's the artifact, and it's even like those games were real games. It's not like you activate Dark Ruler and the game is over, because there still is like a Crystron cluster face down. There still is like an Azuna in their hand and like other non-engine that they've put in their deck and stuff like that. It's not like the Dark Ruler is auto win, but it creates a game of Yugioh. And I feel like it's impossible to create a real game of Yugioh against that deck when it goes first, because you either hand trap it to the point where it does nothing, or you don't do anything.
I think there are some half boards with that deck, but I do agree with the sentiment that a lot of the games with it are just non-games.
And so I think that's the entire point. Like, at least the takeaway for me from this entire discussion is not that like all the games are bad. Like, I do think there's a solid 50 or 60% of Yu-Gi-Oh games at the moment that are pretty good, actually. in this format, and like maybe even above average for recent years. Like the Draco Tail, Mitsu, and Pure Yami. Like I think the interactions between these decks are fine, and I just think that number should be higher. And I think some of the outliers, like the decks that are really trying to win going first or trying to play board breakers or whatever, I think those are fine if they do it in a way that still produces Yu-Gi-Oh games. I'm okay if they're favored going first, or like more favored than other decks or whatever, just like from the raw percentage. I don't have a problem with the win rate going first. I have a problem with how it wins, I guess.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But I mean, and the other thing is like, I guess I was looking forward to it because I thought I actually after Lil, I remember thinking that it was cool that we had a long time to figure out the format now. And now that I'm being presented with K9 Crystron using Mjolnir, I don't feel the same way anymore about 6 weeks leading up until Bologna, because I can't see myself finding a solid solution to a K9 Crystron player rolling a higher number than me. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll see how it develops, but it definitely is worse than it was
Yeah.
previously. And it's funny too, just like, well, not funny, but killing VS was, I think, a big mistake because when you try to, how do you beat Canon Christian going first? You yourself Holy Sue.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
you
then you're fine.
probably do. Yeah.
So that's unfortunate, but here's where we are.
Yep. Well, I think we're going to call it a day now. This has been going on for longer than I even thought it was going to, but I really enjoyed that. Thank you for hopping on and offering your perspective on Genesys and Advanced Constructed. It was a good talk, I think.
Thank you.
And I guess I'll let you go start your day. Well, my day almost ends now, but thank you so much for coming on. I hope everyone enjoyed the Santoli section.
Thanks for having me. Make sure to follow me on YouTube. Just Santoli Yugioh.
Oh yeah, absolutely, of course. Yeah, I think I'm gonna upload this on some channel, so I'll throw a link in the description to Santoli's channel. If you enjoy the way this man thinks about the game, then obviously go and subscribe and all that good stuff. So yeah.
All right, pleasure. Thank you again.
Yeah, no worries.